Hello everyone for our last video of the week before we go off to spring break. We're going to talk about the labors of Hercules. This is inspired by my 8th and ninth grade Latin, but I'm probably going to post this video in the form for like other classes too. Um, just because it's kind of a fun Friday myth to talk about. Okay, so let's get right into it. What are these labors? Why do they matter? And why do we care? So the first one is the Nemean lion. But to kind of lay some groundwork here, the reason Hercules is doing this, or Heracles, his Greek name, um, is because he has been instructed by a oracle at Delphi. These were oracles to the god Apollo, who would help people with various guidance, sometimes more mysterious guidance than other times. But he's doing this because he was cursed by Hera, who is jealous, basically, that Hercules is the son of Zeus, but not by Hera. Um, and so she messes with Heracles as well as other gods for this reason. And she curses him to basically just kind of lose his mind for a little while. And now he has to do some good deeds to get right in the eyes of the gods. So him center there. I'm borrowing heavily from the graphics from that Ted Ed video on his 12 labors, the 16-bit version of his adventures. Upper left there is angry Hera, who is kind of messing with him and causing him to do all this in the first place. Lower left is him talking to his cousin Eurystheus, who Heracles has been told he needs to help. Eurystheus wants to mess with him by giving him impossible labors. And that there's a painting of their interaction on the right. So he has to kill this Nemean lion. Okay, this is the first one. The Nemean lion's hide cannot be pierced by arrows, but it is vulnerable to Hercules' club. Hercules uh, corners him in a cave, and this line may or may not be the source of the leonine armor that Heracles is often sporting. And by that I mean he just takes the hide and uses it like a hood, as in that central picture there. But yeah, there's other lines too in Greek mythology that he could have used for the hide. So who really knows? Who really knows? But he takes the line back to Eurystheus, and Eurystheus is so freaked out that from here on out, Heracles has to stay outside of Eurystheus' city and communicate that he has completed one of the labors. And so the next one is Lernaean Serpent, or the Hydra, as it's usually referred to. And this is the many-headed serpent that Heracles has to destroy every time he chops off one of its heads. Two more grow in its place. He's aided by his cousin Iolaus, and that's going to be important later. Hercules uses Hydra's own venom against it by either dipping arrows or a sword in the venom, depending on the version. And then him and his cousin use fire to cauterize the neck wounds. That lower right painting is Henry VIII, I believe, stepping on a baby Hydra. The story behind that painting is a little involved. But Hydra is actually one of the, or I think it is the largest constellation in the night sky. So Hydra doesn't totally lose out here. He becomes a constellation after being defeated, and there is his D&D information for those that might be useful for. Moving right along, there is a Cernaean hind, as in a deer that runs really fast. Hercules chases it all the way to this place called Hyperborea. Um, Borea just meaning northern in Latin, and this is it's a really cold place, probably much colder and more snowy than Colorado right now. I'm recording this on a Thursday when it's like snowing really heavily. And then Diana is there, and she says the hind is a sacred animal for her, and that Hercules can borrow it if he lets it come back. And that's what he does. He takes it to the king, and then it comes back to Artemis, presumably, or Diana. Um, and then we have the Erymanthian boar, okay, Chiron, that centaur in the lower left, helps Hercules out here. He chases this boar into a big snowy bluff, and he gets stuck there. And getting assistance from Chiron here. That might be where Disney gets the idea for Phil or Philoctetes, who was a faun or a satyr. Because that name is based on a real person, Philoctetes. That's the mentor of Achilles. And so they're kind of combining Chiron and Philoctetes, maybe, perhaps. Okay, and then he has to clean some stables. This one's not super interesting. He just cleans up some stables by irrigating some waterways, and then he does receive payment for this labor. Then there are some Symphalian birds. He basically has to startle the birds out of a tree with a rattle, and then snipe them all, and that's pretty cool. He wrestles a Cretan bull, and in many versions, he wrestles this bull in the same area where Rome is to be founded. So Italy liked to get in on the Hercules and Greek mythological hero action when they could, and so they would often claim, "Oh yeah, like um, Hercules made it over here, and he did this and that in Italy." And they do that obviously for Aeneas is the biggest example, but they do that for others, including Diomedes, but not this Diomedes. For people in ninth grade lit, this is not the Iliadic Diomedes, but there's this king Diomedes who has these flesh-eating, man-eating horses who may or may not breathe fire, and Hercules has to steal them. And he does that by feeding Diomedes to the horses. Go figure. Okay. And then he has to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, who was recently in the Wonder Woman movies, I've been told, and the Justice League movie, briefly. Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure. But she just willingly gives it to Heracles. She has no problem with that. When he's leaving, though, Hera stirs up some trouble, tricks Hippolyta, causes some confusion, and in many versions, Heracles does actually have to defeat Hippolyta to get away. Whereas initially, she's totally okay with this. But nasty old Juno gets involved. This is supposed to be the last labor. I don't know if I mentioned, but initially there's just 10. Okay, 10 is just as good of a number as 12. Um, and so this 10th one is to obtain cattle of this Geryon creature. He's basically a titan with three heads. He's kind of like a conjoined titan person. Yeah, and Heracles defeats them with his apparently really efficient archery and is able to retrieve these cattle. But when he goes back to what's his face? He goes back to Eurystheus with the cattle. Eurystheus is not satisfied. He says that he got help with the Lernaean serpent from his cousin, and he got payment for the stables thing, and so he has to do two more. And that one of the first one is to steal apples from the Hesperides, who are these like minor goddess nymph women who protect this tree with golden apples. So he has to find Proteus, the old man of the sea, or Triton, minor sea god, and wrestle him down so that he'll tell him where to go. If you just read Odyssey, if you're in my literature class, this is familiar. This is what Menelaus has to do to figure out how to get home, weirdly. Um, and then, yeah, he figures out where Titan is, or Atlas, rather, sorry. Atlas, and that's the guy who's holding up the Earth. He's apparently related to these Hesperides women, and Heracles just tricks him into fetching him the apples while he holds the Earth for a little while. So we're supposed to be impressed that Heracles is just as strong as Atlas, and he tricks him. Though I don't totally get how this is trickery. He's just kind of like telling Atlas to do things for him. And Atlas complies, and he gets the apples from Atlas, and then gives him back the planet, and then he leaves. And then, last but not least, of course, the main event is to capture Cerberus. Not to kill Cerberus like he does for some of the earlier labors. He just has to get a leash on him, basically. And he does this without any weaponry, we're told. So I guess he picks up that club later on in the lower left picture. And yeah, he's just able to take on Cerberus usually by grabbing all of his three necks or heads or whatever at once and getting him into a submission. And then he takes him to Eurystheus, and by then he is pardoned by Eurystheus. He's done what he's needed to do according to the Oracle of Delphi, and he's freed and cleared from his charges. Okay, so what are actual sources on this? Not that much. There's not a ton. it's it just goes to show how popular the stories of Hercules must have been, because it's obviously one of the main Greek myths that we hear about, and yet it doesn't have one go-to source in the way the Trojan War is always thought to be kind of archived in Homer's poems, or the Journey of Aeneas, or even people like Jason and the Argonauts. We have Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes. So we don't have like one Hercules epic, unfortunately, because they existed apparently. There's this guy Pisander who wrote one around the 7th century, a little bit after Homer would have been composing his. We know that that guy Hesiod, who also wrote around the same time, probably had a poem called Shield of Hercules. And he shows up in places like Apollonius's Argonautica. Okay, he's one of the Argonauts briefly, not for the whole journey, but he is. Um, and yeah, he gets mentioned otherwise by Ovid, Virgil, and Homer. But unfortunately, from those major writers, Ovid, Virgil, and Homer, we don't have like the definitive Hercules epic. Also, he is very heavily featured on Greek Attic pottery and vases. Uh, well, maybe one of the most popular themes to show up there. But all right, so that's all for Hercules. I hope you guys have a good spring break. It looks like we'll be doing at least a little bit more online classes when we return. So I'll figure out a way to make this even more interactive and effective. But until then, hope you guys do well and enjoy your time off. All right.